I'm Justin Richer, the CTO of UberEther. And over the last year or so, we've been working on a project that we've been calling Bubbles. The reason we've been doing this is that the world that we live in is increasingly mobile. The contexts that we find ourselves in change all the time. You might be on a laptop in a cafe or connected to a corporate network and then move to your cell phone. But we expect our identities to work within all of these different environments. We expect them to be resilient against the changes that we throw at them constantly, and robust enough to work through all of that different complexity from all of these different systems and contexts. So let's talk about an identity system. We've got these folks, and they've got a bunch of applications that they want to log into. This is pretty easy, right? So we give them a bunch of credentials so that they can log into their applications and we're good to go. Except that, let's be real, probably means that they're managing a bunch of different credentials to log into a bunch of different applications and everybody's already having a bad time. But in 2024, we can do better than this. We already have the technology. We can set up an identity provider that holds all of their accounts, and that lets them log in to everything all in one go. It's a great solution, and it works really well. In fact, we've been building out a lot of systems that work like this for many, many years. This isn't new. So let's take all of those same people and all of those applications and put them on a boat. Now, when they're on that boat, they're going to have the same login problem. And we really, really don't want them in this disconnected environment to have to manage all of these different credentials just for all of these different applications. This is a mess. But what we can do is we can still give them an identity provider, and that'll let them log into all of their applications. Seems to be a great solution. Until the people that decided to put them on the boat in the first place decided, you know what? That IDP is really valuable. So we're going to take it off the boat and put it somewhere safe, somewhere that it's not going to get lost at sea because it's got all of our identity information. And that's one of the most valuable assets that we have. So we'll just plug in the boat to the IDP and everything's going to work great. So funny thing about boats, they move. It's kind of the whole point of a boat, isn't it? Now you might be thinking, you know what? We'll just hook up some wireless technology so that we can reach back to the IDP. Everything's going to work just fine. And that IDP might be far away and it'll still work okay, except the latency is going to get a little bit longer and eventually we're not going to be able to see that IDP anymore. None of these networks are perfect. And suddenly we've got this terrible situation where we've got a bunch of people in this disconnected space with a bunch of applications that they're allowed to use. They should be using and they probably need to use, but they can't because the core piece of functionality that allows them to use this is no longer available. The reason for this is that our federated systems assume an always-on connected world. We expect to always to be able to reach that identity provider. But these disadvantaged and intermittently connected systems throw all of those assumptions out the window. So a common approach to this problem is to make shards. So let's take that identity provider, we're going to declare it the gold source copy, and we're going to make a bunch of copies of it. And then we'll give copies of that IDP to anybody who needs it, because they're going to be off in a space where they might not be able to connect back in. This seems great, and it seems to work great for the folks on the boat. Because when they're in dock, we just download the newest copy of the IDP, install it on their system with all of their applications so they get all of their accounts and rights and everything, and then they just go sailing off and everything works. Right? They can access their applications, they can access all of their accounts, and everything is ultimately managed back at that home system. And it gets better when we run into our peers out in the water because, well, they've got a copy too. That means we can federate with each other. We've got compatible policies. We probably have some of the same applications, so we can share information really easily. This is a really, really powerful construct. And when we plug back in later on, we get updates. We just download the newest copy and, maybe somebody needs to get deprovisioned and we've got the latest security policies that are all on here and everything's great. There's a funny thing though, when we do run into our peers. Well, which of us actually has the gold copy? Because maybe we've changed something. Maybe they've downloaded it. Maybe they just don't match for some reason. Does that mean we can no longer trust them? We can no longer federate them? Does that mean we upload our copy to theirs or they download their copy to ours? What do we do with this? And it's even stranger if we come up next to a coalition partner who doesn't actually have the same truth source that we do. They're not going to have a copy because they're not running against the same shards that we are. They've got their own identity system, their own accounts, their own provisioning, their own applications. What do we do with that? Well, we can treat them as a federated system, right? Which means that one of their sailors can come on over, and as long as she can reach her IDP, she can federate in and we can allow her access. This seems really great. And it works really well until her IDP starts to sail away. Now, at this point, there's a pretty obvious solution. We solved our own identity problems in this disconnected environment by downloading a shard of the IDP. Well, what if we just did the same thing to her IDP? Right? We'll get our partners to send us a copy of their IDP, and that means that her identity is still going to work locally in our environment, and it'll be fine. And the people that usually suggest this, they think it's a great idea. Until you point out that, okay, well, are you going to upload a copy of your IDP to their system so that it works in the other direction? And they look at you like you're crazy. No, we can't do that, they'll say. We can't download sensitive identity information and security information. No, that is absolutely not going to happen. And this speaks to the strange power imbalance between these two systems. And we don't really want an exact copy of her IDP anyway. Because think about what's happening back on her boat. They've probably deactivated her account because she's not there anymore. So if we actually got an updated copy of her account, well, it's going to tell us that it's been deactivated. But the reason that it's been deactivated is that she's on our boat and we want it to still work. This doesn't really line up. So what we end up doing is we make her a local account. We make her something that is always going to work no matter what her IDP says, because as long as she's here, we can vouch that she's still here. And we sail along with that, and everything works great. Now, that was an environment in which we probably had some reason to trust her identity provider and federate in. But what if we meet somebody who doesn't have an identity provider, who's just having a really bad day? We don't have a previous policy that says we can collaborate with this person, but you know what? We're going to help them out, get them up out of the water, because if we didn't, their day was just going to get that much worse. So now that they're on board the ship, though, we want them to be able to access a handful of things. They should have some amount of movement. Maybe they can help out the cook in the galley. It's a lot of things that this person might be able to do. The important part is that we can make a local decision based on that. So what happens today? Well, we make them a local account. We create a new account out of nothing and say, this is a person, they exist, these are the only attributes that we have available for them, and we're just going to plug that in and go on. We sail along, and everything works pretty well. And as we keep sailing, weird things happen. Stuff that we wouldn't predict. Stuff that some people wouldn't believe. And we need to be able to adjust based on this. So we might need to mark an account as no longer active because of things that we couldn't have predicted happening. So we now have this copy of the world that's based on this rich local information. So what happens when we go and plug back in? Well, the people that are running the IDP probably look at this and say, you've taken this beautiful shard that we've given you and you scribbled all over it. Except that the scribbles represent all of the rich local context that makes sense for everything that we've gone through. This is our view of the world. Does it actually make sense to throw all of that out and just give us a pristine copy of the shard? Probably not, because the first thing that we're going to have to do is scribble all over it again. This also makes things weird when we run into our peers in the field. Because now we've got these systems and they're supposed to be copies of the same thing, but they don't match up at all anymore. It's not just who has the latest copy, because we've probably both made a bunch of changes in ways that might not make sense to each other. And so because of that, this question about who has the gold source doesn't start to make sense anymore. One of the big problems with the shard-based approach is that it assumes that there is a central source of truth. So then this whole thing becomes an exercise of how do I synchronize that source of truth throughout all of these different nodes that might have different versions of it. And there's always going to be one version that is correct, and we just need to get that out to everybody. But I think a more important question is there a single source of truth that represents the whole world? And I'm coming to the conclusion that I don't think that there really is. So maybe it's time that we rethink how we use federation and rethink how we look at accounts in all of our different systems, not just on boats. But the disconnected and intermittent environments that we find ourselves in there, well, that gives us a lot of motivation to look at things differently. And so, what does this have to do with bubbles? So let's take that system that we had before, with all of those people on the boat, all of the accounts that we've provisioned, the local accounts, the people we dragged out of the water, and let's all wrap that inside of a bubble. And the bubble is a fascinating metaphor here because it allows us to define a boundary. Everything inside the bubble becomes a cohesive system that we can reason about. So we're still using federation technologies. We're still using strong authentication. We're still using local account management and authorization and provisioning and all of that other stuff inside the bubble. All of that still makes sense. But we can now start to reason about how we cross the boundaries of the bubble. What does it mean for an account to come on board? What does it mean for us to talk about an account as it goes out into the world from us? We can now look at technologies like federation, assertions, and even PKI in a way that helps us cross the boundary in and out here and not just give us a world that always works in every context. So, for example, let's say we're talking to a trusted authority when we're plugged back into the dock. Well, we're probably going to download a bunch of accounts and provision them inside this bubble so that they can actually work when we're disconnected. Seems pretty reasonable, right? We've got the authenticators, we've got the people, we've got the attributes, and we trust the source that all of this comes from. In fact, this is probably how we're actually going to start that bubble in the first place. After all, we want to create that bubble and we want to have it make sense in a world that has all of the right people on it with all of the right permissions, and we send it out. And we can keep doing that a whole bunch of different times. That means that we've got different copies of these accounts that are living out in all of these different systems. And if they run into each other in the field, they can connect to each other and everything works really great. And you're probably thinking right now, that sounds a whole lot like the Shards approach that I was just talking about. Well, there's a really important key difference here. We expect every bubble to be a unique and independent system. Inside each bubble, we've got sets of accounts and applications and things that make sense for that bubble. They may have come from the same place, but we are no longer looking at them in terms of being copies of the same system. That means when we need to go and create a new local account, we do it locally within the bubble. We don't expect it to go back up to our source system and be created and then propagated down to us. We create it locally because that's where we're making the decision that this needs to happen. And we write down the fact that we did this locally. This also means that when we're updating our attributes based on whatever unpredictable events we see when we're out in the field, well, we can change them locally because we're now thinking about our accounts in a different way. It's no longer good enough to just think about, oh, we've got this account that's got this set of attributes and that's the end of it. No, those attributes came from somewhere. Maybe we created them locally, but maybe they actually came from somewhere else. Or maybe we have a value that's shadowing something that originally came from somewhere else. And we might even want to know where that source got its information as well, on and on and on down the line. And in fact, this is going to make a huge interconnected graph of data about an individual as they move through the system. But importantly, the information that's attached to that user account in the bubble is local to the bubble. The bubble gives us a well-defined boundary that we can then reason about. So when we change an attribute We know that we're changing it here. And maybe we're going to express that information elsewhere, but maybe we don't. And we end up with a lot of bubbles with a lot of different information, and we can start getting them together. And a fun thing happens when you start bringing bubbles together. They make foam. And foam is a fascinating construct because we've got bubbles of different size, different makeup. We don't expect them to all be the same. And we don't expect the foam to be static either. We expect it to keep moving as it goes throughout the world. We expect things to connect and disconnect and provision and deprovision and anything all else that they need to do in order to keep existing. And so the resulting system of all of these different bubbles is much more robust than any individual bubble ever could be. So when we talk to our peers, we're no longer saying, oh, hey, you've got a weird copy of the same data source that I have. No, we're looking at our peers saying, yeah, you are an independent system that happens to have a lot of information that comes from the same place that I get a lot of my information. Well, that just made a lot of my policies a lot easier. That just made it easier to reason about how much I can trust you about different things because I can validate that you've in fact gotten this from somewhere that I trust. Maybe it's the same as the copy that I have, and that's great. And I can actually make my decisions based on that. And then when we talk to our peers, we can say, all right, you got your information from somewhere else entirely. Okay, I get to decide how much I trust that and what I trust it for. So when I pull that sailor over to my system, well, maybe I'm getting all of her attributes on her way over, but I'm still creating a local account into my own bubble. Because, well, let's think about it. She's going to authenticate using a federation protocol like OpenID, and then we're going to create her an account based on a FIDO authenticator so that she can log in even when she's disconnected. What this means is that we've got a whole bunch of attributes about her from a trusted source, her own original bubble, but we've probably added a bunch of our own information locally and bound all of that to an authenticator that we can strongly verify. That's a really powerful pattern. It also means that we have now created a means for all of these different peer systems to create a wildly decentralized mutual trust. I can decide how much I trust another system, and they can decide how much they trust me. And all of this still works when we're no longer near each other. Since we created a local account, we no longer have to account for the fact that we can't see that IDP anymore. We know where it came from initially, but it's okay when it goes away because the resulting account is local into this bubble system, even though it was provisioned from elsewhere. And it carries all of that provenance of where it came from when it comes into our system. And all of the information that we have inside our own system, well, that can be expressed outbound as well. Every account within our bubble is eligible to be expressed and asserted outbound into other bubbles. And that includes accounts that maybe came from somewhere else initially. So we can actually say, as we're creating an assertion, hey, that person originally came from the orange bubble, and then they came through us, and now they're going out to you. And you can do with that what you will. Maybe you trust the orange bubble and you don't care about us. We were just kind of there in the middle. That's fine. As long as you can trust the orange bubble, you're good to go. Or maybe you have never heard of the orange bubble, but you trust us. And that if we've vetted a person and said that they're all right, well, that's good enough for you. And isn't that the way that trust really works in the real world anyway? Don't we really say sometimes I need to check with an authority, but other times, you know what? You told me it's good enough. That's all that I need. What this really means is that we're now using federation not as an authentication technology, but really as a provisioning technology. It's a way to carry information across the wire from a trusted source. But that also means that we have everything we need to be able to audit effectively. We can talk back to a trusted authority and say, hey, here's everything that happened. Here's all of the account changes that we made. Here's the attributes that we overrode. And we probably actually want to do that with a bunch of different authorities, including our own peers. Because we might want to go say to that orange bubble, hey, that sailor that you sent us earlier, she got up to a few shady things. You might want to look into that a little bit. Now, I really think that all of the technology to build this, it exists today. I don't think this is something that needs to be really invented. I think we've got some fantastic federation technologies. We've got some fantastic assertions and credentialing technologies and trust root management, and even audit logging and shared signaling systems. What I do think is different is how we look at how it all comes together. We've got federation technologies and PKI systems and verifiable credentials and even trust root management across domains with things like Spiffy that allow us to do lots of important parts of this overall system. What we really need is a way to look at things in a cohesive way that makes sense to bring this all together inside of a bubble. Now, I am fully convinced that one protocol and one protocol stack is not going to be the solution here. And anybody that tells you that they've got a solution that just requires you to use their technology, they're lying to you and they're trying to sell you something. Because the real world is not one technology stack. It's heterogeneous. Things are built differently. And no matter if you could get all of your friends to use the same set of technologies, there's going to be someone that shows up that you need to work with that use something else. And you're going to need to figure out how to make that connection work. And really, that's what we do. We connect based on the pieces that we have in common when we work around the things that we don't have in common. That's how we build out systems that are robust in the real world. And we need to build all of this out in layers. Those layers help us separate our concerns, and interoperable open standards give us ways to connect between systems in ways that we might not have predicted before. We need to embrace the diversity of this world in a way that makes sense for everybody that's connecting. And that means we can't all assume that we're all doing the same thing. In the end, I don't really like shards. I don't think that they're a good approach here. They're sharp, they're painful, and they poke holes in things. And as a security architect, I really don't like having a lot of extra holes in things. Bubbles, on the other hand, they provide a clear boundary. They protect, they cushion. They give us a way to move through a diverse world in ways that we might not be able to predict ahead of time. So for me, the future, at least the future that I want to build and the future that I want to see, is in bubbles.